8 people spent the night in a cave more than 100 meters below the surface. In the morning, everything was going to plan, and they were already on their way back up. And then the rope snapped. A fall of around 60 meters. The man died at the scene, and he was left down there at a depth of 150 meters. February 14th, 2026, the Avant de la Lecasse in the south of France. The rescuers couldn't bring him out that day, or the next one. The cave wouldn't let a stretcher through. It took 3 days, and the question was still hanging there. Why did a rope snap when, by every calculation, it should hold 2 tons? The south of France, the department of Hérault. Between the Séran Ridge and the edge of the Larzac Plateau sits the commune of Saint-Maurice-Navacelle, a few dozen residents, dry stone walls, scattered oaks, and a wind that blows here almost all the time. From the road it looks like an empty limestone plain. There are almost no rivers on it. The rain that falls on the plateau doesn't gather into streams and doesn't run across the surface. It goes down, into the cracks, and disappears. Limestone dissolves, that's the whole answer. Over tens of thousands of years, the water widened the fissures, washed out galleries, and left behind a system of voids that nothing on the surface hints at. The only visible sign is an avon. That's what French cavers call a vertical shaft that opens straight out of the ground. Sometimes it's a hole a meter wide, choked with stones, and it leads down for hundreds of meters. This corner of Occitania is considered one of the great proving grounds of French caving. Nobody comes here looking for pretty tourist grottos. They come for the vertical, for shafts you descend on a rope, and for underground chambers that no beam of light reaches. Clubs travel in from Paris, from Lyon, from Normandy, hundreds of kilometers, for 1 or 2 weekends underground. In winter, the plateau is cold and damp. Underground, the cold is a different kind, steady. The temperature in the cave stays at around 10 to 12 degrees all year round, with 100% humidity. On the 14th of February, 2026, a man died on this plateau. 39 years old, a resident of Normandy, one of 8 in a group of cavers. Right up to the last minute, there was nothing unusual about the trip. A schedule worked out hour by hour broke off, quite literally, on a single piece of equipment. 43 years before that February, the cave didn't exist here, at least not for people. On the 2nd of January, 1983, a caver named Gilles Barreau from the GERSAM Club is walking the plateau looking for new entrances. He finds a crack with air coming out of it. For anyone hunting karst, that's the key sign. A blowing crack means that behind the rock there isn't a meter-deep pocket, but a large cavity connected to a system of passages. Air moves between different openings, and the fissure works like a draft. You don't walk away from a crack like that. Getting through it straight away proved impossible. It took 6 separate digging trips with a rotary hammer to break apart the blockage at the entrance and push through into the void behind it. The ordinary arithmetic of exploration. Weeks of work for a few meters. On the 6th of February 1983, Barreau, together with Jean Chéry and Guillaume Mestre, descends the main shaft of the new cave for the first time. They named it the Puits de Robot, the robot shaft. Around 109 meters deep, and you don't take it in one go, it goes in 3 stages, with intermediate ledges. For 1983, and for this region, a vertical like that was serious work. At the bottom of the shaft, a gallery opened up, the Moulière, and beyond it, a way through to a huge underground collector. In other words, the main water channel of the system, where the water of the plateau moves on into the mass of limestone. It became clear that what they'd found wasn't an isolated hole, but the way into a large network. After that, it moved fast. The bulk of the cave was explored in 1983 and 1984. For several seasons in a row, teams went down, surveyed, found new branches, and pushed further and further from the entrance. Every new kilometer demanded longer underground trips, because the journey from the entrance to the leading edge of the exploration was growing along with it. And all of it started as one man's personal find on an empty plateau. Today, the Lecasse ranks among the longest caves in the department of Hérault. The exact figure depends on the source. Some descriptions talk about roughly 16.5 kilometers of passages, others about 22. The data contradicts itself, and that's normal for a living cave. The network keeps being added to. Some branches are surveyed, some aren't. The depth of the system is estimated at around 350 meters below the entrance. Inside, It isn't one single tube. The Edmond-Milot chamber is considered one of the largest underground volumes in the south of France, a fragment of that ancient collector where the water once ran. There's a gallery called Nuit Blanche, the sleepless night, a maze of passages where it's easy to lose your bearings, with shafts from 5 to 35 meters. Between the sectors, there are alternative ways around, so-called shunts, which let you cover the same stretch by different routes. The terrain changes constantly. Sandy passages give way to clay slopes where a person slides down and then struggles to climb back. After that come flowstone galleries, where everything is coated in calcite, and there are sumps, sections completely filled with water. The passage goes under and continues on the far side. Ordinary groups don't pass them. A sump needs diving equipment and a separate qualification. French cavers describe this place with the word mythical. Behind the word is the scale of it. People want to get in here. They read about it in trip reports. It goes on the lists of classic objectives. There's no open access. Entry is governed by an agreement with the landowner and is open only to cavers with a current federal license, after clearing it with the person responsible for access. A random person with a torch will not get into the Lycos, by definition. The group that went down here in February 2026 was entering a cave with rules, a history, and a reputation as a serious place. The classic route doesn't begin with a spectacular abyss, but with tight ground. A short passage, broken up by narrow shafts, brings you out at the head of the big pitch. Then comes the first vertical, about 37 meters along the walls, down to an intermediate ledge. From there, the descent continues, and at around minus 120 meters, you find yourself in a very large chamber. And from that chamber to the far parts of the network, there are still kilometers to go. Covering the whole network in one trip is physically impossible. Getting to the far sections takes hours. The way back takes the same, plus the actual work underground. So clubs plan an underground bivouac, a trip lasting anywhere from 30 to 48 hours, sleeping inside the cave itself. The descriptions of the cave say it in plain words. If you want to really see the system, budget for a bivouac. In practice, that means sleeping bags, food, a stove, a dry change of clothes, all of it hauled in tackle sacks through the squeezes and the shafts. People sleep in whichever gallery is drier, often on a foam mat laid over clay. There's no coming back up to the surface halfway through. Once you've gone down, you stay down until the end. In the caving community, this counts as normal, well-established practice. That's how deep systems are done all over the world. But the practice has a cost that people don't usually think about. The time spent underground multiplies, and with it grows the fatigue and the number of times the same verticals get climbed. And so does the length of time the rope stays rigged on the rock and working under load. The man who died was 39. He lived in Gonneville-sur-Mer, a small commune in the department of Calvados, on the coast of Normandy, not far from beaches that are famous for entirely different reasons. His name was not published in the press. In cases like this, French outlets often give nothing but the age and the place of residence, and the family didn't speak to journalists. We'll refer to him the way the official statements did. A 39-year-old caver from Normandy. From Calvados to the Larzac Plateau is more than 900 kilometers. That's a drive across the whole of France, north to south, 9 or 10 hours behind the wheel at the very least. This wasn't a man who lived near the cave and dropped in on a whim. He drove across the country for a weekend, for one specific cave, with one specific group, on a plan agreed in advance. For people like that, caving is part of life, not a one-off bit of fun. There's nothing in the public record about his experience, his club, or his technical qualifications. We don't know how many years he'd been going underground, or whether he'd been in the Lycas before. Inventing that isn't an option, so an honest gap stays here. What is known is the makeup of the trip. 8 cavers, accompanied by a guide. The phrase accompanied by a guide appears in every report. It means the group had someone responsible for the route and the organization. Whether this was a commercial service or a club trip with an experienced leader doesn't follow from the available publications. Whether the guide held a state diploma is also unknown. In France, that diploma is called the DEJEPS in caving, and it's mandatory for professional instruction and guiding. 8 people plus the person leading them is a large group for a vertical cave. Every shaft is done one at a time, one after another, and the whole vertical section eats up a lot of time. All of them were using the same rigging. That will matter later. Friday, the 13th of February, 2026, in the afternoon. People are changing on the surface. Oversuit, helmet with 2 light sources, harness with the gear on it, tackle sacks. The weather on the plateau no longer matters at this point. There's no wind and no sun in a cave. The schedule was set by the length of the route. To have time for the far part of the system, they had to go down on the Friday. Verticals in a cave like this are done with a technique cavers call SRT, single rope technique. The principle is simple and unforgiving. Going down, you're on a descender that breaks you by friction. Going up, you're on mechanical ascenders. One on the chest harness, the second on a foot loop. You're literally walking up the rope, lifting yourself centimeter by centimeter. It's hard physical work, especially with a sack. There's one thing that sets it apart from mountaineering. In the mountains, there's a safety rope separate from the working one. In classic caving technique, there is one rope. It's the way up and the safety line at the same time. Between a caver and the floor of the shaft, there is nothing else. Not until the ledge he puts his feet on. That's why the whole culture of vertical caving is built around the rigging. The rigging is the way the rope is fixed in the shaft. It isn't attached at a single point at the top, but at a series of points down the whole height. An anchor in the wall, a knot, the next section. Those intermediate anchors are called rebelays. Between them go deviations, tie-offs that pull the rope away from the wall. The goal is always the same, that the rope never touches rock anywhere, in any position of the body. On the Friday evening, the group got through the vertical section without incident. 8 people and the guide went down into the system, collected their sacks, and headed deeper in, towards the bivouac site. All that was left up top was a hole in the ground and the ropes running down into it, waiting for them for the next 24 hours. Down below, time works differently. Underground, there's no sunrise and no sunset, no change in the light, no sound from outside. The only reference points are the watch on your wrist and the schedule the group set for itself. People who sleep in caves all describe the same sensation. A day stops being a day, and all that's left is the alternation of work, food, and sleep. The group spent the night from Friday into Saturday inside the cave. That was a planned part of the trip, not a forced stop. The cold on a night like that is the main enemy. Around 10 degrees at full humidity sounds bearable, right up until the moment you stop moving. The suit is soaked after the squeezes. The body has lost a lot of heat over a day's work, and all night the system is burning its reserves just to hold temperature. Nobody gets up in the morning feeling rested. There were no reports of any problems on the first day. In the available publications, there isn't a word about emergencies, injuries, losing the route, or water in the system before Saturday morning. They went down, they got there, they spent the night. On the Saturday morning, the group started packing up the bivouac. That's a job in itself. Gather the gear, pack the sacks, clear up your rubbish. In a cave of the Lycas is standing, that's an absolute rule, because anything left here stays here forever. In a vertical cave, things don't work the way they do in the mountains, where going down is the easy part. The same shafts have to be climbed from the bottom up, on ascenders, with sacks, after a day underground. The hardest part always comes at the end, when you have the least left in you. The group started climbing. Around midday on Saturday, the 14th of February, 2026, it was an ordinary winter's day on the surface. Climbing a rope is the most heavily loaded phase of any trip. A person with all their gear weighs close to 100 kilograms, and that whole mass is hanging on one point. Movement on ascenders isn't smooth. Every step up is a small jolt. The rope goes tight and slack, dozens of times in a row. The body swings, especially on a free hang with nothing to brace against. And all of it happens when the muscles are already spent, the hands are cold, and the attention has dulled. During the climb, the rope broke. The man fell from around 60 meters. That's the height of a 20-story building. From that height, neither equipment nor fitness decides anything anymore. He died at the scene. He came to rest at a depth of around 150 meters below the entrance, deep inside the system, beneath the point where the rope had broken. The rest of the group were unhurt. Nobody else fell. And then begins the part that gets described in accident reports in very dry language. People who had just lost a friend were still down there themselves. The rope they were planning to climb was severed. There was no contact with the surface. A mobile signal doesn't reach underground at all, on any network. Rock doesn't let radio waves through. The only way to report what had happened was for someone to climb out under their own power. How long that climb took, and exactly how the rigging was restored on the broken vertical, isn't described in the available sources. All that's known is that the alarm was raised quickly. On the plateau by the entrance to the Avon, the first emergency vehicles appeared during the day, on the 14th of February. In France, an underground accident triggers a mechanism unlike the one in most countries, and everything from here on rests on it. The gendarmerie was brought in, including the PGHM from Oloron-Sainte-Marie. The PGHM is the mountain rescue arm of the French gendarmerie, professional rescuers who work in the mountains and on difficult terrain. They bring equipment, helicopter support, and legal authority. When someone has died, a rescue operation immediately becomes an investigative act as well. But they aren't the only ones going into the cave. Spéléo Secours Français, the SSF, the French Cave Rescue Service, was called in. Its story begins in 1977, when the state decided to lean on the Caving Federation itself for underground rescue work rather than build a separate structure. The SSF is a specialist commission of the Federation, an officially recognized civil safety association. Across the country, that's around 1,900 volunteers. The reason is simple. The only person who can get someone out of a cave is someone who knows how to move through caves. No outside service is going to drag a stretcher through a squeeze at that depth without caving training. So in every department that has caves, a technical advisor for caving is appointed, confirmed by the prefect. He's the one who calls out the local team, knows his caves, and directs the work underground. In the Department of Aero, there is such a team, and it knows the Lycos. This isn't an abstract cavity on a map, but a place local cavers have been going into for decades. The people gathering at the entrance that day knew exactly what was waiting inside. The 3 stages of the big shaft, the tight ground on the approaches, the clay, the cold. By Saturday evening, the picture was clear. Down at 150 meters was the man who had died. The task was stated in the hardest possible terms: descend, confirm the death, and attempt to bring him to the surface. On the night of the 14th to the 15th of February, 15 people went underground, 10 caver rescuers and 5 firefighters. They passed through the same entrance, the same narrow shafts, and the same vertical that the group had descended a day earlier. They found him in the same place where he had come to rest after the fall on Saturday afternoon. Among those who went down was a fire service doctor. Underground, death has to be certified by a medic, not by a rescuer. He did it there on the spot. Formally, from that moment, the operation stopped being a rescue and became a recovery. The work went on all night. They could not bring him out. The reason wasn't a shortage of people or a lack of experience. The problem was the cave itself. Between the point where he lay and the surface were squeezes, sections where the passage narrows so much that a person edges through sideways, breathing out, and the sack has to come off and be pushed ahead. A person gets through a place like that by bending their whole body. A stretcher doesn't bend. By morning, it was clear that carrying on in the same way was impossible. The teams came up to the surface. 3 reasons were named in the reports: cold, fatigue, and the difficulty of the passage. The rescuers had spent the entire night in soaking wet suits and came out physically at their limit. The first reports of the tragedy said it outright. Recovery is not possible at this time. The wording sounded unusually blunt for a news bulletin, but it reflected reality. The cave was not giving him up. For his companions, that meant a trial of its own. All 8 members of the group had reached the surface by then. Down below was the man they had gone in with on the Friday, and between him and daylight lay 150 meters of rock. Monday, the 16th of February. A second SSF team from the Department of Aero arrives at the entrance. 11 rescuers go down and work for 7 hours straight. Their job wasn't rescue, and it wasn't even searching. It was engineering, widen the squeezes so a stretcher could pass. Cavers call this de-obstruction, breaking out and enlarging a passage. Down there, at a depth where you can't stand up straight, people take turns working on the rock while the others carry out the debris. A more radical option was also considered, using explosives to widen the passage. In cave rescue, that's a last resort, used rarely and carefully. A blast underground changes the stability of the roof and creates a risk for the rescuers themselves. The work was carried out on judicial instruction. The legal detail matters here. Once an investigation into the circumstances of a death has opened, everything done at the scene is carried out on an official order from the investigation, and not simply on the rescuer's own decision. The transport itself works like this. Every horizontal section is covered by a chain of people passing the stretcher hand to hand. Every vertical is raised on a hauling system, a set of pulleys that lets several rescuers pull the load upwards. At each intermediate point, the stretcher has to be transferred across again, and that's done by someone hanging alongside on their own rope. On a 100-meter shaft, there are several of those transfers. By the most conservative count, dozens of people were involved in the underground operation at the Lycas. 15 on the first night, 11 on the Monday, plus the gendarmes, plus the support on the surface. The SSF cavers are volunteers. They were breaking rock underground for a man who could no longer be saved. The operation ended on Tuesday, the 17th of February, 2026. The widened passage finally allowed the stretcher through, and he was brought to the surface. The final stage was carried out by gendarmes, including the PGHM specialists from Oloron-Sainte-Marie, the same mountain rescuers who had arrived back on the Saturday. The stretcher came out through the same hole in the ground the group had gone down on the Friday afternoon. From the moment the rope broke to that Tuesday, around 3 days had passed, and several separate underground shifts. The Montpellier Public Prosecutor's Office confirmed that the work was finished. The official statement said that the complex recovery operations were complete and that a post-mortem would now be carried out as part of the forensic examination. Standard procedure for any sudden death in France, the medical report records the medical circumstances and confirms the mechanism of the accident. The gendarmerie's investigation didn't end there. It continued in order to establish the circumstances of the fall. There's one more detail that usually gets a single line in the news. Across 3 days of work in the cave, not one rescuer was hurt. That isn't luck. Underground rescue operations are dangerous in themselves. People work on the same verticals, in the same cold and the same tight ground where the accident happened, and they do it after sleepless nights. The history of cave rescue includes cases where a recovery operation cost more lives. Here that didn't happen. For the family in Normandy, those 3 days were a wait whose content we can only guess at. The relatives made no public statements. The name wasn't released, and that's their right. He was brought home, 900 kilometers from the plateau he'd traveled to, for a weekend, and on the surface there remained the entrance to the Avon and a question with no answer. What exactly happened to that rope, 60 meters above the floor of the shaft? Quite a lot is known about how ropes fail in vertical technique, but nothing we say from here on will be tied to this particular case. Modern caving ropes are static. That is, they barely stretch at all. That's fundamental. You can't climb on ascenders on a stretchy rope. You just bounce on the spot. The diameter is usually 9 or 10 millimeters, and the construction is a core of load-bearing strands inside a protective sheath. The breaking strength of a rope like that is 2 tons and more. An undamaged rope doesn't break under a person's weight. Ever. 80 or 100 kilograms is not a load for it. If a rope has broken, it means that at one specific point, its strength had dropped by a factor of 20 or 30. The main cause of that drop has been known for a long time, and French caving manuals name it plainly: friction against a sharp rock edge. The mechanism goes like this. When a rope runs over a bend on the rock, every movement of the person on it saws the rope across that edge. The sheath wears through, starts to slide and bunch up. The manuals describe a characteristic effect. The sheath slips and gathers along a stretch of about a meter, after which ascenders can no longer pass that spot. Then the core is exposed, and the fibers are cut through one by one. How fast the friction works depends on several things: the tension, the angle of the bend, the amplitude and number of oscillations of the rope, the nature of the rock. Limestone with sharp fractures is the worst case, and the more the person swings, the faster the wear. Good rigging is exactly what protects against this. Intermediate anchors break a long hang into short sections, and each one works as an independent support. A long hang without them leaves the whole vertical with one single vulnerable spot. There are other factors too, invisible to the eye. The age of the rope, clay and sand driven into the core and working as an abrasive, contact with chemicals, old damage from previous trips, And now, the line between what's established and what remains speculation. The official cause of the rope failure has not been published in any open source. The results of the technical examination of the equipment are unknown. We don't know how old the rope was, who rigged it, how many intermediate anchors were on that shaft, or whether there was a bend over an edge anywhere on the route. All of that is for the investigation to establish, and no public conclusions on any of those points could be found. The same goes for the organizational side. Neither the guide's qualifications nor the status of the trip itself follow from the publications. The findings of the gendarmerie's investigation had not been made public as of the available reports. What is reliably known is not much, only what several independent sources confirm. A group of 8 cavers, with someone leading them, went down into the Avin de la Lay Casse on Friday the 13th of February, 2026, in the afternoon. They spent the night at a bivouac deep in the system. On the Saturday, around midday, during the climb back to the surface, the rope broke. A 39-year-old caver from Normandy fell from around 60 meters and died. He came to rest at a depth of about 150 meters. He couldn't be brought out straight away, and he was only recovered on Tuesday the 17th of February after 3 days of work by SSF, rescuers, firefighters, and the gendarmerie. Everything else is an open question. The story turned out to be extremely short in time and extremely hard in meaning. There was no navigational error, no flood, no panic, no chain of mounting problems of the kind underground tragedies are usually built from. There was a normal trip, a well-established format, a routine night's sleep, and an ordinary climb out. Vertical caving works exactly like this. Between a person and 60 meters of empty space stand one rope and the whole system holding it in place. In February 2026, on the Larzac Plateau, that system didn't hold. Until the cause is officially named, every explanation stays a theory.